Is this alright or is it distorted? Yeah? We'll see how it goes, yeah? Okay. Well, in the first place, I must say that I'm extremely honored to be here at this site among the 920 more sites around the world where I would say some of the representative of the 99% of the world population are now sitting and taking the square in a movement of dignified rage and intellectual endeavor and protest. It's difficult to talk here, to speak here. Difficult because it would be easy to make a rally. It is more difficult to have a kind of a lecture, a moment of reflection, because we don't know one another, and this is not a school. And it would be nice to actually to be able to have the time to see who we're coming from, where we're coming from, and the question we have. So what I'm going to do is trying to deal with this title, composite title, which is Crisis, Movements and Commons, as a way to frame a little bit the problematic we are all facing at this moment in history. And crisis, movement, and commons are all three terms very crucial for us to grasp. And they're all spelled out in the plural because there is in fact a pluralities of crises, there are a pluralities of movements, and there have been a plurality of movements, and there are pluralities of commons, of shared occasions of community formation, claiming ownership to resources and defining for themselves the ways to share, etc. I would like to start with a rhetorical question that someone has urged me to do, given how some of the debates within these movements are developing, and whether do you think that would be a fancy world, a world of regulated capitalism, of a world in which the banks and the worst speculators would be reined in, taxes for the rich would be slightly increased, and everybody were doing their jobs within a capitalist framework, a competitive framework. This is some of the issues that are coming out of the movement, and I think it is a rhetorical question that I firmly would say, wait a minute, this is not really what we are here for. We are not here to demand and shape, to demand some form of regulated capitalism without at the same time having a program coming from below that of alternatives way of reproducing our own livelihoods. We have a history behind us. We have the history of hundreds of years of struggles and the history of different forms of capitalism that even more regulated than the one we are in today which have many horrors with them. Now, crisis, movement, and commons, these are three terms that are actually three aspects of reality that in fact are co-evolving in the different phases of capitalism. Crisis, there are obviously today many crises. There are obvious, the list is endless, from the food crisis, the financial crisis, the livelihood crisis, the precarity, job crisis, the crisis of the future that many people face, and of course the environmental crisis that threaten to destroy us all, or anyway to make it even harder for the bottom of the world population. But one aspect of the crisis, one thing about when we talk is pretty much like the banner at the entrance of this occupation site claims capitalism is crisis, and this is an aspect which is important for us to reckon. In every single phase, capitalism is crisis. It is a crisis in the sense that it produces its own workings, produces crisis. Even when it's booming, when it is booming, and this is important for us to grasp, to understand. Even when it is booming, even when it is growing at high rate, and everybody says that the economy is doing well, even at that point, it produces crisis for some. It produces crisis for those who are left out, who are out-competed by the competition, by the game, the capitalist game. It produces existential crisis for those who have to produce the products in order to be competitive. It produces crisis for those who are left out, those whose resources are expropriated in order to make space for commodities, what many people have called enclosures, the land dispossessed, the grass, the resources taken away from indigenous communities, from many parts of the world, etc., which are all linked to how a process of capitalist development, even if in the booming phase, works. So, yes, in a sense, capitalism is crisis in these many sense, but it is also the case that we have to understand that there is another aspect of the word crisis in this particular phase. Today, we are living in a moment of crisis of what some may call social stability. It's a particular crisis which is a turning point that opens up an opportunity for the 99%, in fact, to reclaim the conditions of the reproduction of their own livelihoods, of our own working in common, our own social cooperation to meet needs and desires. And this is a particular crisis of a deal of a model of capitalism which has occurred in the last 30 years, which in turn was instituted to deal with the previous crisis, the crisis in the 70s, which was the crisis of the post-war model of capitalism. And that model of capitalism in turn replaced the previous model, was instituted to deal with the crisis which occurred in the previous model, the one that crashed with the Great Repression, the Great Depression and repression to many extent, especially in Germany and in Italy. But yes, so it is important. We have to recover that history. We have to have a way to learn from history, not in an abstract sense, but we are here at this moment in history with all the memory and the knowledge and the struggles of brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers in the past decades, and we cannot propose solutions which somehow are solutions that take us back to the contradictions of those times. Okay, so this is very, I think, important for us to grasp and to understand. I rushed to take notes, and now here I'm struggling with the technology I had in my hand at the time. These phases of crisis, of social stability, these crucial phases that we are now in this particular moment, are moments which produces the coming out of the 99%, okay, as we are here now. A 99% that somehow comes out and says what, for example, the Zapatistas, the indigenous people in the 90s said back then in their own community, yeah, basta, enough. There is this moment in which people come together and says, enough of this. And of course, this is the opening up, the opening salvo of a movement information. So crisis and movements are interlaced straight away. But then this opened up a different issue. If we look back at the dynamic of capitalism itself, both geographically in its own working, through its own operations, through the competitive games, at one point in time, or in a limited point in time, or if you even look back at the evolution of the different forms of capitalism, what we notice is that struggles have also a role for making capitalism develop. And this is the trick. This is the trick that I think we should always be aware of. I'll give you an example. In the way neoliberal capitalism of the last 30 years has been constituted, if you look at the origin of neoliberal capitalism back in the early 80s, late 70s, market liberalizations and financialization and precarity and abolition of a lot of entitlements for workers and for citizens at large were accompanied by a massive wave of restructuring, of closing down factories, for example, where the strength of the working class movements of the 70s was concentrated, especially in Western Europe and the United States. In the 1970s in the Western Europe and the United States, there were massive struggles both inside the factory and outside the factory. Inside the factory for higher wages and meaningful work and reduction of working time, and outside the factory for the explosions of entitlements, for the inclusions of those sections of the working class that did not have entitlements. For example, in the United States, the civil rights movement is an example of women or students in a different sense, in different ways. Okay? So the neoliberal deal, so to say, in the 1980s onward, that one of the ways to deal with this was really to create a system in which these struggles were disoriented. On the one hand, you shift production in countries where with a relatively young working class, young in the sense of not having matured the working class experience in terms of struggles, because industrialization was relatively new, and the creation of free export zones where union rights were not existing, etc., etc. And organizing and blackmailing individual countries and individual working classes with ongoing capital movement. If any of these working classes were to organize in certain ways, in certain mode, if these working class peripheral, but now actually central, working classes were to organize to fight for better conditions, etc., they were threatened by capital movement away, therefore disinvestment, therefore threat of jobs and livelihood. So in this dynamic, movement became functional to capitalist development. Okay, so to the reshaping of capitalist development. So the mechanism, the system of capital was able to co-opt struggle and to make it functional to its own development, okay, its own dynamic, its own composition. This is one way. Another way was, if you go back historically, and you go back, for example, at the very first big crisis of the last century, in fact, the Great Depression. The Great Depression posed a huge problem for the ruling classes at the time. Not just so much because there was a depression, but because the ruling elites of the time were pretty much like the ruling elites of this time. Their own recipes for dealing with the millions of
Is that any better? If it's not, take it back. Yeah. Carry on.
The old recipes for dealing with the millions of unemployed people and for the lack of capitalist growth and profitability was in fact to crash, to push for wages further down below, to reduce further wages and increase and worsen working conditions. The problem they faced at the time was that the Great Depression corresponded in many countries of the world and in the wake of the symbolic, at least symbolic values that the Soviet Revolution had at the time. Working classes around the world were started to organize massively, both in the waged and unwaged, unemployed and employed people were creating the very first strong organizations that then accompanied us throughout the 20th century. So the recipe of the old liberal elite of the 1930s were recipes that had a direct political meaning. In order to implement market reform in that sense, in back then, they had to crash the unions. They had to crash, very grassroots unions that were starting to develop and starting to emerge and become very successful in their own struggles. And these were the unions that they're not the stereotypical unions of the post-war period, and for bureaucratic unions. They were very grassroots-led unions who were able to combine, articulate, bring together migrant populations from all over the world. Migrant populations that, in fact, capitalists like Ford were very keen to keep divided and keep pitting one against another. It's very famous how Henry Ford in the early part of the 20th century were talking to one group of workers, the Irish, saying, accept these working conditions or otherwise we'll give this to the Italian, and to the Italian, do this, otherwise we'll give it to the blacks, or etc., etc., etc. So pitting groups of workers one against the other was a classical strategy back then. These unions that were formed through sit-down strikes, through a variety of struggles, were in fact a moment of recomposition which created a very formidable force. Now, these conditions were conditions that forced the elites to change discourse, to change the way to deal with it. The threat of major civil unrest and revolution was, in fact, in the eyes of many ruling elites back then. And short of going onto the Italian fascist or German Nazis route, the alternative was, in fact, to give in to many of the demands coming from below and start to articulate a different model of capitalism. We have this very early on in the New Deal, but the New Deal was just a minimal example. What actually comes as a solution of this crisis for capital was the Second World War that redesigned completely the geopolitics of the world, and the institutionalization of unions that the government of the United States was in fact very keen to make even the most reluctant capitalists to accept. Roosevelt forced Ford to accept the union. He did not want to accept it. But then the union became bureaucratic machines. Bureaucratic machines that serve the purpose. The purpose in the post-war period was that of the so-called productivity deals. The productivity deals was a key deal that allowed the capitalist system to grow at the same time as maintaining movements and struggles in check. What was it all about? It was a promise which consisted in this. First, you get a certain degree Productivity is output per labor, is the capacity of a worker to produce output. Now, if you compare productivity increase, if you allow productivity increases to go along wage increases, capital solves a big problem. The problem of the wage share and the profit share. You would able to have a system of economic growth that at the same time allow workers to have betterment in terms of wages, betterment that then is accompanied to the consumerism of the 1950s and 60s, okay? Betterment of wages, and at the same time, betterment of profit, okay? There are mathematical formulas that can show this, okay? But giving up on productivity increases, it implies, from the workers' point of view, to actually give up in the control on how you produce things, okay? The rhythm of work, how you organize production, the freedom to define the what, the when, the how much you produce. Not that this freedom was there before, but this freedom was further limited with this deal. So there's another trick in these deals of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the Keynesian deal, so to say, the productivity deal. That the other trick is that in order for capital to maximize its own production, you also have to exclude as many people as possible from the deal. So the wage working class was the one, or certain sectors of the wage working class, in fact the most militant back then, was included, okay? But many sectors of the working class were not included. For example, public workers, nurses, people working in schools, all the sector of public workers for which productivity could not be measured, they stay out of the deal. Women stay out of the deal. This is the time in which women, after the Second World War, return in mass in the home. Okay, so the sphere of reproduction at the time was mostly organized by women at home. Okay, with no access to the wage. Okay, which raised the question of patriarchal control of money within the family. One of the issues that in fact was fought by the women movement. Other sections of the population were not included. The blacks, the minority. I'm making an example of the United States, the migrants. Okay? So all these sections were left out of the deal. Okay? To the extent the deal was working, and this was the Keynesian deal, the regulated capitalism deal. To the extent that this deal was working, for capital was okay. But in the very moment these sections of the population start to claim a share of the deal, and sections within the waged working class start to question, especially the young, start to question the rhythm of work, the dynamic of exploitations in the factory, started to question even the nature of why we have to spend so much time of our life to sweat out, to buy stuff, the youth countercultural revolutions of the 70s. When all these movements came out, then the deal was collapsed. Okay, the deal collapsed in many ways. Inflation skyrocketed. Many attempts to bring in into the deal to repress the control failed until the Keynesian deal come to an end in the 1970s. Okay, so here we have a history which shows us a dynamic between capitalism, and movement. Okay, not all the movement, but part of the movement. Okay, a dynamic that was based on some divisions within different sections of this 99%. Some got something, other were excluded. So one of the issues that we are absolutely, I think, it's very crucial for us today to come to term in our own thinking about alternative and promotion of alternatives is in fact this question of the hierarchies, material hierarchies within the concentrate wealth in few hands while the 99% is screwed up. We know this, but it's also crucial for us to understand, to carry on the movement, that the division within ourselves, okay, within this 99% are fundamental divisions that need to be addressed in a different way, in fact, than the claim, maybe the struggle against the elite, but maybe in a more solidarity, communitarian way. And here comes the question of the commons, the third element, I think, which help us to understand and to frame, to move our steps forward in some promising way. The commons, if you think about the commons, when we're talking about the commons, we're talking about, if anybody's got the drinks, that they've got something here that can, some cheers. Talking about solidarity, beer is okay. Cheers.
I've got water in there.
Cheers. Oh, okay. The third aspect is the commons. I was saying, now when you think about the commons, I mean, if the commons is the realm of the shared resources, but also community engagement with the resources, community engagement with one another, is the realm of communal decision making. And here there is no model. Here, in these squares, in our movements, especially in the global north, we do like this to express consensus, and it's fine. But in other conditions, we don't do this. We just maybe in other reality we simply don't say anything. Yet we understand, we agree. There is no one model, but there are always consensus-seeking ways to reach agreement. There is community participation to share resources. Now, if you think about the role of the commons is not a thing out there that we want. If you look at the history that I just outlined very briefly, the commons have always been in our history. If you think about the struggles, for example, the struggles of the workers I was referring to in the 1930s, the migrant workers coming together, working together on the same assembly line, or traveling together in a train that they hit not to pay the ticket and go wherever the job was. I mean, these are moments and conditions and spheres of commoning, of creating a world together, of sharing resources. The workers at the assembly line help one another, cover for one another, is the conditions of the commons. Now, I would like to say that there are, perhaps, again, the relation between commons and movements come into, again, three aspects. In the first place, it's important to understand that commons presuppose movements to many extents. Many of these, our movements, if you look at what happened in Egypt, Tahrir Square, in Wall Street, the Occupy Wall Street, most likely here, and in many other occasions, in Bolivia, the water war, in the early 2001, all these moments of movement emerging, if you actually start to inquire how they came together, how is it possible? Many people say, well, just a Facebook call and somehow it just come out. Well, yes, that may well be the case, that Facebook has had an impact. But I think that the key thing here is the network of solidarity, the various network communities that have been formed that previously, that have been working on things, that have been doing campaigns, that have created reality, that have intervened in their own local specific reality to address most likely livelihood needs, the need for care, the need for education. They have participated in local battles to improve and in fact expand the spheres of solidarities and commons. So these movements that we are having here today are the result of the commons, in a sense, being worked out. On the other hand, the very fact that we are here, the existence of the movement, is the ability of community engagement is the alternative. So for us comes the next step. To what extent this movement can revendicate and start to demand resources for projects of commons that really address the problems that we are facing, the issues we are facing, the issues of education, of exclusions, of food, of whatever. We have an endless list of social and environmental issues that we are struggling for. Our demand, much has been said about this movement doesn't have demands. And to an extent, that's the case. But it's also to an extent it's very difficult to have an endless list of demands because we do need an endless list of demands here, right? Because the issues we have to deal with are really many and large, okay? But the question of demands is also important to be addressed. And how do we address it? What is the demand ought to solve? Ought to solve a system of capitalist regulation, a new system of capitalist regulation, or we do want regulations on something that for our own purposes, for purposes which are constructing new forms of creating in commons. This is the key issues. For example, we do demand higher entitlements. We have been exposed to the last 30 years of ongoing cuts in social entitlement. The beginning, the enduring, and the end of neoliberalism now is at every single step is a moment in which new cuts are implemented at every level. And this phase is even, we just have to look at the chronicle in the newspapers in the last few days, not just here, but all over the world. This is the way forward of the ruling elite. Continue cuts, because this is the only way forward. And we don't have a promise for anything. So yes, our demand is definitely to block the cuts. Our demand is definitely for more resources. But can we tie this demand for more resources to projects that disentangle us from this system? Can we use our collective imagination, collective creativity to create new forms of doing and dealing with these with issues that doesn't put us in a way linked too much to actually de-linked from the capitalist circuit, the competitive relations with the others, which if you think about our daily life is an ongoing, whatever activity we do is an activity that for which it is a deep, profound contradiction. We are reproducing our livelihood only to the extent we undermine someone else's livelihood. This is competition. This is what a commons project is actually against. And this is where we should really put our imagination to create these alternatives. So the key issue is really how do we link demands to concrete projects of constitutions. And here there is a lot of work to be done. I hope it didn't turn into a rally, but actually
Bravo, Massimo! Bravissimo. Adesso si vede un discorso, no?
Yeah, definitely. I mean,